You felt it, haven't you? That strange little lurch when someone you grew up with casually mentions they've paid off their mortgage, or they're taking a sabbatical, or they've somehow built a portfolio that throws off more than your salary. And you smile and say something warm, but inside there's this quiet, specific question that isn't really about them at all. It's how? Not how in a technical sense. You know how investing works. You've heard the word compounding more times than you've heard your own name. The question is more like, how did a person who started in roughly the same place as you, with roughly the same education, roughly the same job market, and roughly the same number of expensive mistakes along the way, end up in a completely different financial universe? And the answers you tend to hear are either insulting or useless. Either you didn't want it enough, or it's basically impossible unless you got lucky with property in 2012. Both feel wrong. Both leave you exactly where you started. But here's the part nobody seems to mention. Becoming a millionaire is not nearly as mystical as people think. It's also not nearly as easy. And the gap between those two truths is where this entire story lives. My name is Dan, and I spend far too much time thinking about why normal people stay financially stuck, while a small number of seemingly ordinary people quietly build serious wealth. If you've ever wondered whether the millionaire gap is about luck, talent, or just a different set of habits, stick around because the answer is a little bit of both. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. This is just what happens when you spend way too much time staring at the same wealth data everyone else scrolls past. Let me introduce you to two people who sat through the same 3 decades and ended up in completely different financial universes. Eleanor worked as a postal carrier in a small Midwestern town for 32 years, drove the same ancient Volvo wagon the entire time, brought a thermos and a packed lunch every single shift, let everyone assume she was just getting by like the rest of them. The month she retired, her daughter found out, almost by accident, that quiet, unremarkable Eleanor was sitting on just over $1.3 million. Nobody saw it coming, because Eleanor had committed the one unforgivable sin in American life. She looked completely normal while being quietly enormously wealthy. And then there's Marcus. Out-earned Eleanor every single year for 3 straight decades. Regional sales director, company car. Right now, he's polishing a leased luxury SUV on a driveway in front of a house where the kitchen remodel cost more than Eleanor's first home. He's refreshing a banking app, staring at a 401k with about $38,000 in it. Same 32 years, one quiet millionaire, one loud budget. And the reason for the gap between them is so boring, it's almost insulting. Let's start with a number that sounds like great news and is actually a magic trick. The average American household is a millionaire, seriously. The mean household net worth is right around $1,059,000. So on paper, the typical American family has crossed the $1 million line. Congratulations to all of us, I guess. Except that's not the typical family at all. Because the median household, the one standing dead center, where half of everyone is richer and half is poorer, sits around $192,000. Not a million. That gap, the chasm between $1,059,000 and $192,000, is what this whole video is about. Here's why those two numbers are so far apart. Averages lie when the room is lopsided. If you put 9 regular people in a bar and Jeff Bezos walks in, the average net worth in that room suddenly jumps to about $40 billion. But not one of those 9 people can afford the tab. Remember that. The lopsided bar trick. It's going to show up again. A handful of enormously wealthy households drag the average up into fantasy land while the actual middle sits way, way down below it. The top 1% of households own about 31% of all the wealth. The bottom half own about 2.5%. So when someone tells you the average American is doing fine, what they're really describing is the top 15% wearing the whole country as a costume. And it gets worse when you look at what that median net worth is actually made of. Strip out home equity, the value locked inside a house you still have to live in, and the median household's financial assets drop to around $66,000. That's it. That's the real liquid cushion for the family in the exact middle of America. So here's the real question. If the middle is that thin, how does an Eleanor happen? Because millionaires absolutely exist. There are roughly 24 million of them in this country, more than any nation on Earth. Something is clearly working for some people. So let's talk about who those people actually are, because I promise you, it's not who you think. When you picture a millionaire, you probably picture Marcus's SUV, inherited money, a trust fund, a fancy title, a startup that popped. So let's just kill that image right now. The largest study we have on this, a survey of over 10,000 American millionaires, found that 79% of them received exactly zero inheritance. Zero. 89% are first-generation rich. Nobody handed them a head start and their jobs. This is my favorite part. The top 5 careers among millionaires in that study were engineer, accountant, teacher, manager, and attorney. Teachers outranked doctors. Let that sit for a second. The person grading chemistry quizzes is statistically more likely to become a millionaire than the person doing your annual physical. 1/3 of those millionaires never earned 6 figures in a single year of their entire working lives. Not once. 93% said they got there through plain, unglamorous consistency, not a big salary. There was no secret door, no cheat code, just a normal person with a normal job who did one specific thing differently. This is the thing that breaks people's brains, so let me say it plainly. Income is not wealth. They are two completely different things. Confusing them is the single most expensive mistake in personal finance. There's an old framework that splits people into 2 groups. You've got the income statement, affluent, and you've got the balance sheet affluent. The income statement, affluent, look rich. Big salary, big house, big truck payment, the whole performance. But their net worth is a rounding error because everything that comes in immediately goes back out. That's Marcus. He doesn't have a money problem. He has a keeping money problem. The balance sheet affluent are the opposite. They might look aggressively normal. Modest car, modest house. Nothing on them worth stealing. But their net worth is enormous because for decades they quietly kept a chunk of everything they earned. That's Eleanor. Here's what that difference looked like in real time. Every couple of years, Marcus got a raise or a bonus. A good one. One year, it was $14,000 after taxes, and Marcus did what felt completely reasonable, which was let his life grow to fit it. That $14,000 quietly became a slightly bigger apartment, nicer dinners, a $450 a month SUV payment, and a few upgrades that seemed entirely earned. By December, the raise was gone, absorbed, invisible. And Marcus honestly couldn't have told you where it went. He did that with every raise for 30 years. Eleanor got smaller raises, and every time one landed, she did something almost aggressively boring with it. She nudged up one automatic transfer, the one that pulled a little money out of her checking account on payday before she ever saw it. And then she forgot the transfer existed. That's the whole divergence. $450 at a time. One man let the money drift toward his lifestyle. The other sent it toward his future and then went back to sorting mail and eating a sandwich. So if it's not income doing the heavy lifting, what is it? Let's look at where the failure actually happens. Here's the median again, but this time for retirement accounts, and it's genuinely rough. The average 401k balance is about $168,000. Sounds okayish, right? Except there it is again, the lopsided bar trick. The median 401k, the one in the actual middle, is around $44,000. 3 out of 4 people have less than the so-called average. And it gets more brutal the closer you look at people who should be ready. For households ages 55 to 64, the median retirement balance is about $17,000. That's supposed to last 20 or 30 years. Calling that a nest egg is generous. That's a nest egg that skipped a few meals and is afraid to open its mail. Now, part of this is a savings problem, and I want to be fair about that, but I also want to be fair about how small the margins really are. The personal savings rate in America right now is hovering around 3%, 3 cents of every dollar. And a huge chunk of the country literally cannot save more because there's nothing left after rent, groceries, insurance, and gas. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans couldn't cover a surprise $1,000 expense from savings. More than a quarter have no emergency savings at all. So when a financial guru wags a finger and says, just skip the lattes, understand that for a lot of these households, there were never any lattes. The cushion was gone before the coffee. And I want to slow down here because that 3% isn't an abstraction. It's a feeling, and you might know it intimately. It's the feeling of checking your balance before you tap your card at the grocery store. It's doing quiet arithmetic in the school pickup line about whether the field trip money and the electric bill can both survive the same week. It's putting one thing back on the conveyor belt while the person behind you politely pretends not to notice. It's the 2 a.m. ceiling staring, where you calculate for the fourth time whether the check engine light can wait until the next paycheck. That is what a 3% savings rate actually feels like from the inside. It isn't laziness, it's a math problem you were handed and told to solve alone in the dark with the wrong tools. But here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean maddening. Even the people who do have room to invest routinely sabotage themselves. And not because they're dumb, because they're human. There's a long-running study tracking what the average investor actually earns versus what the market hands out for free. Over the last couple of decades, the average investor trailed the market by more than a full percentage point every single year. Some years way more. In one recent year, the gap was over 8 percentage points. Why? Because when the market drops, people panic and sell. When it rockets up, they get greedy and pile in. They buy high, sell low, over and over, guaranteeing they capture the fear and miss the recovery. Which brings us to the actual engine. The thing Eleanor understood and Marcus never did. Compounding. Before you tell me 7% sounds made up, it isn't. Over the last century, the broad American stock market has returned around 10% a year on average before inflation, and roughly 7% after inflation eats its share. Nobody had to pick a genius stock to get that. You just had to own the whole thing and refuse to flinch. That's the number Eleanor quietly rode for 30 years while Marcus was busy trying to time it, outsmart it, and honestly, mostly ignore it. Let's do the math on becoming a millionaire from nothing. If you invest and earn a roughly 7% return, and you start at age 30, you need to put away about $610 a month to hit $1 million by retirement. Totally doable for a lot of households. Not easy, but doable. Now watch what happens when you wait. Start the exact same plan at 40 instead of 30, and that number jumps to about $1,300 a month. Wait until 50, and now you need over $3,200 a month to reach the same finish line. Same destination, but every decade you wait roughly doubles the toll, because you've stolen years away from the one ingredient compounding actually runs on: time. And here's the cruelest, most beautiful detail about time in the market. Almost all of the gains come from a tiny handful of days. If you had $10,000 invested for the last 20 years and stayed put the whole time, you'd have ended up with around $72,000. But if you got scared, jumped out, and happened to miss just the 10 best days out of 20 years, you'd have less than half that. And those explosive best days almost always land right next to the scariest, worst days. So the people who panic and sell during the crash miss the rebound by a matter of hours. Eleanor never sold. Eleanor barely looked. That was the entire strategy. Do nothing for 30 years on purpose. Now I could stop here and say, see? Just invest early and don't panic and pretend this is a story about personal willpower. But that would be a lie and you'd smell it. Because for millions of people, the reason they never become millionaires has nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with a system that quietly locked the door before they arrived. That whole beautiful compounding machine, the 401k, the automatic contributions, the employer match, all of it. 42% of full-time workers don't have access to any workplace retirement plan at all. None. And it breaks exactly along the lines you'd expect. Among the lowest earners, nearly 79% have no access. Among the highest earners, it's 18%. So the single most powerful wealth-building tool in American life, the tax breaks, the free matching money, the effortless automatic investing, is handed out most generously to the people who already need it least. It's like a government program that hands out free umbrellas, but only to the people already standing indoors. The folks getting rained on don't qualify. That's not a personal failing. That's the architecture of the thing. And then there's the ground everyone's standing on, which has been quietly tilting for 40 years. Since about 1980, wages for the typical worker have barely crawled. Meanwhile, housing has gotten dramatically more expensive relative to income. Healthcare has outrun paychecks by a mile. College costs have gone completely feral. A home used to cost around 3 times the typical household's income. Now it's over 5 times. So the surplus that previous generations had left over to invest, the money that fed the compounding machine, has been steadily eaten by the basic cost of having a roof, a body, and a degree. When your parents tell you they bought their first house at your age on one salary, they're not lying and they're not smarter than you. They just happened to be standing in the economy before the floor tilted. Same effort, different physics. Stack it all up and the picture is clear. You can only ride the wave if you already own a surfboard. So the last few decades of soaring home and stock prices didn't lift the people with no assets, it left them further behind. And if you've been sitting there this whole time feeling a low hum of shame, feeling like everyone else got a manual you never received, I need you to hear this. You are not the problem. A 3% savings rate is not a national character flaw. It's the mathematical fingerprint of an economy where the essentials eat the paycheck before the paycheck can build anything. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed for you. So the system is tilted. The door is locked for a lot of people. The math is unforgiving. Where does that leave you specifically right now? It leaves you somewhere more hopeful than it sounds. And I mean that because here's the strange twist at the center of all of this, and it's the thing I promised you back at the start was almost insulting. The recipe is stupidly simple. It is genuinely one of the most boring recipes in the entire world. Buy a low-cost fund that owns basically the whole market. Put money in every single month automatically so you never have to feel brave. And then do the single hardest thing a human being can do, which is nothing. Don't sell when it drops. Don't get clever. Don't try to beat it. That's it. That's the secret the luxury car salesmen don't want framed on your wall. You just learned the entire strategy in one sentence. And it's somehow less exciting than assembling flat pack furniture. And I know exactly what you're thinking, because I'd be thinking it too. You're thinking, Dan, that's fine for someone with money left over at the end of the month, but I don't have $600 lying around. And you might be completely right. That's the honest part nobody says. If the margin isn't there yet, the answer isn't to hate yourself. It's to know precisely what the game actually is, so that the moment even a little room opens up, a raise, a paid-off car, a side income, you point it straight at the machine instead of straight at a nicer version of Marcus's SUV. Because that's the real difference between our two people. It was never about the size of the shovel. Marcus had a bigger shovel every year of his life. Eleanor just started digging earlier in the same spot and refused to stop, refused to panic, and refused to let a good salary trick her into thinking she was already rich. Marcus spent 30 years looking wealthy. Eleanor spent 30 years quietly being wealthy, and the two are almost never the same person. So no, most people will never become millionaires, and a lot of that genuinely isn't their fault. The plans are locked away from the people who need them most. The wages stalled. The essentials got greedy. That's all true, and pretending otherwise is an insult. But some people do make it, and when they do, it almost never looks like the luxury SUV. It looks like a postal worker in a 20-year-old Volvo who did the boring thing for a very long time and told nobody. The math is brutal, but it isn't a secret and it isn't magic. It's just early, boring, and relentless, applied to whatever room you can carve out. And if you can find even a little of that room, that quiet, unglamorous room, and start pointing it at the future instead of the SUV, then 30 years from now, you get to be the person nobody realized was wealthy the whole time. Start today, because the one thing you can never buy back later is time.